I'm going to take you through my process in building a scenic base for displaying some of my models. I started out by cutting up these chunks of florist foam into the rough shapes of the rocks I wanted to make. This foam is a lot softer, so I had to coat it with a layer of gesso in order to give it a base to paint over. Once I had all the rock formations covered in a few layers of gesso, which did take a couple of days, I glued them all down in the rough outline and shape that I wanted for the scene to recreate a desert canyon. I then sealed a bunch of it with more white glue and covered the entire surface in order for the sand to stick. I watered it down a bit with a brush and then went and laid down a sand layer. I didn't worry too much about being too neat in this phase. We kind of wanted to look more random. I did assemble a few small little pebble areas to create some diversity in the terrain and then covered those with more white glue again. So here it is before I painted, and you can see kind of the different textures of sand. First primered in black and gave it a good base coat, and then I put a top layer of brown just to start adding some shadows, give some definition to the rocks. I then went over with an airbrush and added a few areas of light to start creating some delineation between the different regions. After the base coat, I used a Grelin earth and added some technical paint in order to create areas of dried water, and then used Agrax earth shade to create some more shadowing, to add more contrast again to the rocks. Since I wanted it to look a little more Martian, I used a Doombull brown to add some redness to the earth as well, and just brushed that over everything. I noticed some of the dirt was starting to come up with my brush stroke, so I added some more white glue and watered it down, and then brushed over the entire area to seal it a little bit better before I did some more aggressive dry brushing. I went with a layer of Zemesi Desert, which has a lot warmer of a tone, and used it to simulate sunlight hitting the raised edges of the rocks and some of the dirt areas, before finishing off all the highlights with Morghast Bone to give it a drier appearance again. So at this point, I was pretty much done with the dry brushing and decided to add my details. These are some pre-made desert plants, but I knew I needed some different textures as well, so I made a few longer pieces, just cutting a few bristles off an old brush that I had and didn't care about. I super glued the end and glued it to a piece of paper, let it dry, and then once I had a few of these made, they were all standing in nice little rows, I was able to pull them off and glue them to my diorama board. And I noticed that the color was a little off, so I went ahead and added some Agrax earth shade to darken them and make them fit in a little bit better. You can see here after I get through all of these, they actually blend in pretty well, and it adds a little bit of verticality to the brush, so it looks a little more natural instead of just the same uniform little clumps. This is my first time doing a project like this, and there's definitely a few things I could have done differently, but I'm pretty happy with the end result, and in part 2, I'll show you the backdrop I painted for it.